Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ChMC Masterclass digital event. My name is Natasha and I'm an events coordinator at CMI, and I'll shortly be handing over to David to begin today's event. If you have any questions during the digital event, you can ask them using the live chat box on the right of your screen, and we shall answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and the CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David, ChMC Assessment Manager at CMI, to begin the event.
Thanks, Natasha, and morning everybody, and welcome to today's session. What I want to cover today is to have a look at the background to Chartered Management Consultant, just to give you a feeling of where we've come from and how we've got to where we are today. And then I'm going to take you through the assessment process itself, so you'll have a better understanding of what's involved, what's required from you, and how that all works out in the real world. So when we think about Chartered Management Consultant, how do we get to where we are, and why do we have Chartered Management Consultant? Well, some while ago now, it seems to have been quite a journey, but some while ago now, there was thinking that what we need in the Chartered Management Consultant arena is some consistency, some harmonization of what it means to be a professional Chartered Management Consultant, what it means to be a professional management consultant. And so working with a group of firms and with the MCA, we came up with a whole load of professional standards. And these professional standards looked at what it meant in different aspects of management consultancy to be a recognized professional and to achieve the chartered status. And the other reason that we did this was there was some thinking that there was a lack of consistency and quality across the management consultant environment. So you could get a well-known name, you could engage with somebody who was cheaper but may not necessarily have a background history in this, and there was no real way of benchmarking who was good and who wasn't good. So the thinking was, if we had a benchmark, that the chartered status, it will enable clients to engage with people and make better buying decisions informed on quality, not just on price. So where do we bring value? How do we bring value? How do we bring a quality engagement to the client? And that's what we're looking at when we assess you for Chartered Management Consultant. The other thinking was, if we developed a benchmark and a chartered status, it would be much easier for firms to attract and retain best quality talent. So that was another thinking about it as well. You know, we've got so many people in our organization that are Chartered Management Consultants come and work for us because we're clearly a high quality, high value organization. Equally, we've put you through this process because we value what you bring to the organization. We value what you bring to the whole management consultant arena. So that was the thinking behind it. And it's really important for me to mention at this stage that we didn't do this on our own. As I say, we did this with members of the MCA, and we did this with a number of firms as well involved at the beginning. So this isn't something the CMI have done in isolation, sat in our ivory tower and gone, what the organization needs is this. This has been developed in a real world situation with real world operators and real world firms. So it has quality and credibility. Now that said, although we didn't develop it in isolation, CMI are the only people that can award the status, and we've been appointed by the Privy Council as the awarding body for Chartered Management Consultant. So we are the only ones that can assess you and take you through that process and grant you the status as well. We started with a few firms, but we're now working with over 40 firms currently and engaging with more firms all the time. Week on week, we are engaging more and more organizations. And this is really bringing to life the value of the status, the value of being a chartered management consultant. And it's really starting to get that ball to a tipping point where more and more people are going to be wanting to do this. So now is a good time to be involved. And in that, part of this is being involved with government as well. So we are talking to Cabinet Office, we're talking to government offices in Whitehall, and they are now seeing the value of this as well. And we have members of Cabinet Office sit on our oversight board to help steer where we're going. Now, once it becomes a requirement from government, and we believe that will happen very shortly, it will be a case where government are looking for chartered management consultants to engage with on their projects. So this is really starting to snowball, really starting to go forward. And as I say, now is a really good time to be involved in this. One of the things that's just really important to remember is this is about professional recognition, and professional recognition of bringing high quality, high standard professional development when you're working with clients and engaging with organizations. This isn't an academic status. This is real life, practical, hands-on experience recognizing status. This is about what you've done, where you've done it, how you've done it, what difference you made, why you did it, all of those things. And we'll talk about that a bit more as we go through. But this isn't academic. It's really important to remember this. When you're doing this, you have to show that you have at least 5 years experience or 7 years experience, depending on what route you go down. And it is real experience, real operating as a management consultant. That is really important to remember. This isn't about project management. This isn't about PMOs. This isn't about specific subjects like IT architecture or finance. This is about management consulting. So we do stipulate that you have to be operating as a management consultant. Now, clearly, anything like this will have links with other professional statuses. And while we do, it's important to recognize that being a member of an organization or holding a current professional status other than Chartered Management Consultant will help you to achieve Chartered Management Consultant, but of and by themselves, they won't get you in the door. They will help you because they'll recognize your experience and you have gone through this process before, but they won't give you the status. Everybody who is awarded the status goes through the same process and gets awarded the status on the same basis. So once you see somebody else who is Chartered Management Consultant, you'll know what they've been through. You'll have been through the same experiences as them. Nobody gets grandfathered. Nobody gets given this depending on their hierarchy or their status or anything like that. Everybody has to go through the same process. Being a chartered manager, having certified management consultant certificate, or being a member of MCA or CMI or the IC does not by itself get you in the door. Gets you to the queue, if you like, to get into the door, but everybody gets through the door in exactly the same way. So we talked about getting through the door. There are a number of routes that we can go through. There's what we call the on-program route, and the on-program route is where you are taking part, or you have taken part in one of your firm's training programs or another recognized program that's given you a certificate like the level 7 professional consulting qualification. And you've got at least 5 years experience. Now, if you've done both of those things, you can apply to become chartered. The other way to do it is if you're an experienced professional and you have at least 7 years working as a management consultant, operating as a management consultant. And again, that's not based on hierarchy. That's just recognizing that once you've done over 7 years, you've got a bit more experience. We can take what you're saying a bit more as read rather than getting you to fill in lots of other information, giving us more and more written evidence. We will take for granted some of the stuff you say. But that said, you still have to demonstrate how you meet the criteria, and you still have to prove yourself at a professional discussion. And again, I'll talk about that as we go through. So that's a bit about the background, a bit about how we get you to the door. Now, how do we get you through that door? So how does the assessment work? Well, there are a number of stages to this. And the first stage really is to recognize whether or not you're ready to go for assessment. Now, that might sound a strange thing, because if you're sitting there on the other end of this call and you've got 7, 8 years experience, you might think, yeah, I'm ready to go for this. the first thing you need to do is talk to somebody else. Talk to somebody in your firm to make sure that they agree with you. And the reason we do that is it's very easy to write our own checks. It's very easy to say, yeah, I'm brilliant, aren't I? Get somebody else to say, yeah, you are actually as well, because you only get a limited number of goes at this. So we want you to be as ready as possible. Once you've decided to do it and your firm has agreed to put you through it, or if you're an independent, you've got to that point where you've checked you're ready, you've checked yourself against the criteria, and you want to do it. Get somebody else to look at your submission to make sure that you are meeting the criteria that you think you're meeting, what you're saying is making sense. Once that's all done, you would submit your submission on the electronic portal that we use. Everything is done online. It will then be picked up by one of my assessors, who will do two things. They will contact you to say they're going to be your assessor. Then they will have a look at your written submission, and they will either at that point invite you to a professional discussion, or they will say, this is good, but we need more. It's not quite there. We need you to polish it. We need you to submit some more evidence. If that happens to be the case, don't take that as a negative. That's a positive thing to do. It's an opportunity for you to make your submission shine and give us the best possible submission that you can, in order that we can take you on to that professional discussion. Once you get to that professional discussion stage, that then is a pass or fail. It happens virtually. It's not an interrogation. It is very much a discussion, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through as well. But that stage you can pass or fail. So you need to be ready to do that when you get to that point. Once that's happened, the assessment will be moderated by one of my moderating team, and they will say whether or not they agree with the outcome that the assessor has arrived at. And at that point, you will be informed of the outcome. And hopefully you will have passed, and we can award you the status. But if you haven't, it's not the end of the world, because within 6 months you can then reapply again. Sorry, after 6 months you can reapply again. Now, one important thing to remember is, if you fail, this is not saying you are not a good management consultant. And we like to think of this rather like your driving test. If you fail your driving test, what that says is, at this moment in time, for the 45 minutes or so that you were on this driving test, you did not demonstrate what you were required to demonstrate. Now, if you asked everybody else around your family and everybody that's driven with you, they're likely to say you're really good, you're a good driver, you're safe, you're careful, all the things that you're required to do. But for that test, you didn't prove it. And likewise, when we do the professional discussion, if you fail at that stage, we're not saying that you're not good. We're saying, for the hour or so that we had you, you did not demonstrate what we needed you to demonstrate. That's what we're saying. Remember, it's a snapshot in time. So if you do fail, don't get too downhearted. You can always reapply again. But for that period of time, you didn't do what we needed you to do. Sorry, struggling to speak there. So one big question that I get asked is, how long does it take? How long does it take to do this submission? How long does the assessment process take? And my answer generally is, it all depends on you, and really, how long is a piece of string? Now that sounds vague, but what I mean by that is, think back to when you were at school, think back to when you're at college. Are you one of those people that when you got your homework, you did it straight away? Or are you one of those people that when you got your homework, you left it to the very last minute in order to do it? How did you approach that kind of thing? How do you approach that kind of thing now? If you have a task to do you set aside time and do it straight away, or do you wait till the deadline is nearly there and then focus all your energy on it and do it that way? That's the difference this will make. And some people will say that what I've done is I've taken an hour every other lunchtime for 2 weeks. Some people will say I did it all on a Saturday morning. Some people will say I took 2 days off and focused all my time on that and nothing else. Some people will do it in very different ways. So it really very much depends on how you work. Now, what we're asking for is limited. If you're an experienced professional, for example, we're looking at about 2,500 words. So there's a lot of thinking that you need to do before you start putting pen to paper. And as I think it was Einstein that said, if I had a problem to solve in an hour to do it, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking and 5 minutes writing. So you might want to think about that. There's a lot of thinking that goes on here. A lot of thinking, how did I get to be this good? How did I get to where I am at the moment? What have I done in the past that's got me to this point? Think about all those things before you start putting pen to paper. So again, it really depends on how you work. If you do that and you spend hours thinking, you can do that while you're doing other things. One of the things I always also say to people is treat us like a pitch. If you have a client that comes to you and says, we're thinking of doing X, can you help us? And you say, yes, I can. Think about why you say, yes, I can. And treat us in the same way. So we're saying, why should you be chartered? Tell us how good you are. Tell us what you've done. Tell us how you got to be as good as you are now. Now, it's really important at this point to remember that this is about you and not about your organization. So what are we looking at when we're doing this assessment? Well, as I said, we're assessing you and not your organization. That's really important to remember that. But it's also really difficult for those of us that have grown up in the West, thinking about I, me, I've done this, I've done that. When constantly we're told to think about the team. It's not you, it's the team. From small children, remember all those voices that said, it's not you, dear, it's the team. It's us, it's we. This, we want to know about you. So it's I. We want to know all about you, what difference you make. So what are your values and ethics behaviors? How have you behaved in an ethical manner when you've been challenged? How do you go about leading and managing other people and leading and managing yourself? How do you interact with the client operating environment? And really importantly, it doesn't stop at that point, because how have you got to be as good as you are? And how are you going to stay at the top of your game? So what have you done in terms of personal and professional development? And we will come to you and ask you for your CPD for the last 12 months and for the coming 12 months. So think about that as well. This isn't a one-stop. This is, you've awarded the status, how are you going to maintain it? How are you going to stay as good as you are and still bring value and quality to every engagement that you have? Now, when you're thinking about gathering evidence and when you're thinking about all these things and you're thinking about your thinking process, and before you put pen to paper, you might want to think about a couple of tools. Now, one that's often used is the STAR tool. So think about the situation, the task, the action, and the result. What was the situation? What was I tasked with doing? What did I actually do? And what was the outcome of that? So some people like that tool. My favorite tool is 6 serving men. So I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names were what and why and when and how and where and who. Now, I use that personally in all sorts of situations, not just at work, but in life generally. So what am I doing? Why am I doing it? When am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? Who else is involved? Where am I going to do it? What was the outcome? Why did that happen? When does that need to happen? All of those things. If you think about those things, it tends to give you a structure before you start writing anything down. Now, that's just tools that work for me. If there are other tools that work for you, use those, of course. You know, there are lots of tools in the toolbox. Use the ones that work best for you. So when you've done all that, you've done your thinking, you've done your writing, you've submitted your application, what are we going to do with it? Well, the first thing we do with it is to check that it meets what we call VACs. So the evidence is valid, and the evidence that's in there relates to the competencies. Now, when you're completing your written submission, think about everything you're putting in there, because you've got a limited word count. Think about what you're putting in there and think about how that relates to the competencies. Map it to the competencies. There's a column for you to map it to competencies. Now, if you've got narrative in there that you can't map to a competence, why is it in there? If it's contextual setting narrative, that's fine. Keep it minimal. But if you've got a lot of words in there that you can't map to the competencies, think again, because what we're looking for is valid evidence. We're not looking for fluff. We're not looking for weight. We're looking for quality. And again, think about a pitch. If you're asked to present to submit a pitch to a client, and the client says, I want 2 sides of A4, no more at this stage, you put in 4 or 5 sides of A4, well, don't answer the question. You're not going to get any further. So think about that. Is the evidence that's in there valid? Does it meet the competencies? Is the evidence that's in there authentic? Is it about you, or is it somebody else's evidence? Is it about you, or is it about we and us? Because we want to know about you. Don't forget, this is about, we're assessing you, not your firm. Is the evidence that's in there current? Now, current means evidence relating to knowledge, skills, and behaviours that you've demonstrated in the past and can continue to demonstrate now. There was an example of what wouldn't work. My first degree is in IT, but it's a long time since I did that, and it's a long time since I've really used that in anger. So if I was to say I can write software, I can do coding, that kind of thing, it would be very much out of date. So it wouldn't be any point in me putting it in there, because I'm not something I'm currently doing, even though I'm entitled to say I've got a degree in this. So think about what you're putting in there. Is it still current? Could you do it tomorrow if you were challenged? And make sure that the evidence you give is sufficient. So it meets the competencies, it's authentic, but there's enough of it in there for the assessors to make a decision on whether or not to take you forward. If there isn't, they will come back to you. Now, if they come back to you, the word count drops again. So think about getting this right first time. Share it with somebody else. Make sure that it makes sense, because don't forget, we think we see what we think we've written. So check that what you're saying actually makes sense. It's not in jargon, and anybody else could understand, pick it up and understand it. There is one template and only one template. Parts of it you will fill in if you are experienced level 7. Then you'll fill more of it in if you're coming on this from an on-program route. It's all the same template, and we use that for every single application. So again, everybody comes to this through the same route. Same template, just different bits that you fill in depending on your experience. Stage 2 is the professional discussion, and stage 3, if you like to call it stage 3, is the continuous personal development and the CPD that we will come after you for every 12 months. So be prepared to do that as well. Remember, this is live. This is not an academic status. So when you're compiling your written submission, one thing to think about is why you and why now? Why should you be awarded ChMC status? So think about those 6 serving men again. What difference have I made? How have I made that difference? Where was that difference measured? And who else would agree that I've made a difference? When did I make that difference? Is it still current? Is it relevant? Is it within the last 5 years? Now, one thing to consider here, and one thing to be very careful about, is where the difference was made has to follow the confidentiality rules. So if you were working, say, for Santander and reporting to Mr. Jones, we don't want to know that. What we want to know is you were working in a financial environment, reporting to a C-suite manager. If there is anything in your submission that identifies a firm, identifies a person within a firm, it will be deleted, removed from the system. You will get a message, your legal team will get a message, and you'll have to start again from scratch. And you'll have to anonymize any submission that you've put in. So just check when you are putting in your submission that it meets the confidentiality rules. Now, some people will say at this point, but I'm working for the NHS, I'm working in the health sphere, or I'm working in the defence sphere. There are only one organisation within that. I'm working with the MOD. That's obvious, isn't it? Yes, it may be obvious, but even so, I want you to say I'm working in the defence sphere. Now, within that, it may be obvious that you're working for the MOD, but you could just as easily be working with somebody else who's operating within that sphere. So still stick with the confidentiality rules, even if there is only one potential organisation for which you could be working. Really important to remember that. If you don't, it's just going to get sent back to you. One of the other questions I'm asked is, should I start gathering evidence? When should I start gathering evidence? I might be at 4 years on my program. I'm looking to do this next year. When should I start gathering evidence? Gathering evidence. What I always say is start straight away. You can never have too much evidence. You can put too much evidence in and break all the word count rules, but you can never have too much evidence to start with. So collect evidence as you go along. If you've not already started, start now. Collect as much evidence as you can. Then select the best of that evidence to show you in the best possible light. Connect that evidence to the criteria, the competencies. And if that evidence doesn't connect, think about it again. Why is it in there? What good is it doing? How is it making your submission the best it can possibly be? And then take a moment of reflection and think to yourself, does this show me in the best possible light? Is this the best submission that I can put in? If not, don't rush. Go back, revisit it, make it the best possible submission you can do on the first go. Now, we still might come back to you and ask you for more evidence. We still might come back to you and ask you to clarify something. But if you've given it your best job to start with, that's less likely to happen. And if it does happen, you'll be in a better place to fill in those gaps because they're only going to be small gaps. So think about that. Start collecting your evidence, selecting it, connecting it, and reflecting on it, and do that now. So when we're thinking about evidence, there are examples of weak evidence, and weak evidence is something that we see sometimes that is clearly from a job description. So you might think something like, at a leadership and management level, this translates to providing stretch opportunities and bringing the best out of people by creating a safe space for them to work and grow. That's straight out of a job description, isn't it? Or straight out of a description of management consultancy. So we need to think about that and say, well, so what? So what does that tell me about you? So what did you do within that? So what was the outcome of that? So what were the specifics about that? That's a very vague statement. So think about the statements that you're making. Are they vague? Are they actually about you? Are they telling us anything that's worth hearing? Because if not, it's just fluff, and it's just going to take up space that you could be using for much better evidence. So better evidence tells us about you, tells us what you did. So, for example, I've consistently delivered exceptional work, both in client-facing programs and internal development projects. My current role sees me leading projects which directly impact the growth and financial success we will have this year. In the previous 2 years, I delivered in excess of £3.5 million worth of sales. So we've got numbers in there. We know exactly what you're doing. That's a core part of the team who bid and won a landmark £50 million project. Now that statement in there, core part of a team, is really important. If you're part of a team, that's great. What did you do? What was your role in this? Did you sit at the back quietly, keeping your head down, just doing what was asked? Or did you lead? Did you have a play in this that actually made a difference? So think about those things. Remember, we're assessing you, not your team. So think about what you actually did. Think about think about me, all of those things. Really hard. Now, I said I've mentioned referrals and getting it sent back to you before, but think about this. It's not a bad thing. You get 2 chances to get it right. Do the best you can on the first go. And then if you get asked for more evidence, it's just filling in gaps, just beefing something up rather than big chunks missing. So don't think of it as a bad thing. Think of it as an opportunity to make it shine. So it's about you, the difference you make. We're assessing you, not your team, not your firm. Think about why you and why now. Think about, would someone who doesn't know what you do make sense of your evidence, or is it all jargon? Is it all technical speak that is going to make it difficult to assess? And really seriously think about quality, not quantity. We don't want a lot of fluff. We don't want a lot of filler. We want the essence of you and why we should take you onto the professional discussion. So let's think about the professional discussion. We've done the written submission. We've got to the point where we're going to take you on and we're going to meet you face to face. That all even though that's going to be virtual, we're going to meet you face to face. And we will revert to the telephone if all else fails, but we really want to see you because we want to know that the person we're assessing on the professional discussion is the person we're supposed to be assessing. So we will ask you for some photographic evidence. Now that can be a driving license, a passport, a work ID card, anything really that's got your name and picture on it that works for us, just so we know that we're actually speaking to the person who we're supposed to be speaking to. Now, as I say, if all else fails, we will go to a telephone. But if we have to go to a telephone, we still want you to provide evidence that it was you, provide evidence that you are the person we should be speaking to. And we would want you to do that before we can arrive at an outcome. So even if we go through the process, you will still need to provide evidence before we can provide an outcome. Preferably, though, it will be face-to-face on a virtual platform like this. The professional discussion lasts about an hour, and it will be at least 50 minutes, but it could be up to about 75 minutes, depending on how the conversation's going. Have we got all we need from you? Are we just pushing for a little bit more? Now, the time it takes is not an indicator of the outcome. So if we finish at 55 minutes, for example, it doesn't mean that you've passed and everything's great. If we go on to 75 minutes, it doesn't mean that you failed because you took that much longer. Time is irrespective of the outcome. The outcome is based purely on how you demonstrated how you meet the competencies or not. The purpose of the professional discussion is also to validate your submission. So you said this, you wrote this, and we can all write a good story, but can we walk the walk when it comes to it? So this is what you said. Let's have a bit of proof about that. Let's have a bit of evidence. Let's dig into that a bit deeper. And the assessors are very good at doing that. The discussion will also include some items relating to your CPD. How did you get to be this good? What are you going to do in the next 12 months to stay at the top of your game? And you will be challenged about your ethics as well. So think about a situation where you've been challenged ethically and what you did about it, how you reacted, not the firm, not the firm's ethical officer, not anybody else, not your manager. What did you do? What did you do when you were challenged that made a difference? So think about that, because we will challenge you on all these things. It's really important at this stage as well to remember that this is a professional discussion and all the assessors have been through this process. All the assessors have been or currently are management consultants, operating management consultants. And they've all been through this process and they've all been awarded the status. So they are fellow professionals and they're looking to have a real discussion with you. It's not a Q&A, it's not a test, it's not a grilling, it's not an interrogation. It may feel like that sometimes, but that's not the intent. We just want to know how good you are and why we should give you the status. Now, I mentioned you can pass or fail this, and that's very clear, very, very important to keep that in mind. You can fail this and you will only get one go at the professional discussion. If you fail it, you have to wait 6 months before you can reapply. One of the really, really important tips about the professional discussion is make sure you leave enough time. We've talked about the time it takes, 50 minutes to 75 minutes. Leave 2 hours in your diary. Don't be in a situation where you've got a meeting directly after this and you've got to go. We've seen that happen and you will fail. Make sure that you turn up, both physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, whatever way you need to turn up. Make sure you turn up ready to have a professional discussion. Make sure you turn up ready to give us what we need on that in that session. If you're not in the right mind, if you're not in the right space, if you're thinking about something else, if you're thinking about all the things you've got to do afterwards, trying to finish off things that you've done before your meeting starts, all of those things will get in the way and will not give you the best opportunity of passing. Think again about the driving test that I mentioned at the start of this presentation. If you're going to your driving test and you get held up in traffic, you're not going to be there on time. So you make extra time to go. If you go to a driving test and something terrible happens, a car crashes in front of you, whatever it might be, you may not be in the position to carry on with the driving test. We're talking about the same kind of thing here. So make sure that you're in the right space, you've prepared well, you actually turn up. Apart from physical, you turn up in all the ways that you need to turn up and are completely present. That way, you'll get the best opportunity of passing this and get the best opportunity of being awarded the professional status that you deserve. It's about you. I, me. I, captain. It's not about your team. We want you to be the best consultant you can be for that hour. We want you to succeed. We are not going to waste our time. We're not going to waste your time. Now, with that in mind, not everybody gets to go to the professional discussion. We have people that fail at written submission because they can't demonstrate how they meet the competencies. They don't demonstrate how they meet the competencies when asked a second time, and so we don't take them on to professional discussion. So we're not going to waste anybody's time. If you get to professional discussion, we think that you can do this. We need you to prove it. We're not trying to catch you out. There are no trick questions here. We want to hear all about you, how good you are, why you're so good, why you should be awarded ChMC status, and how you're going to stay as good as you are. So come, turn up, treat us as the pitch. We are your most important client for that session. Treat us like that. Make friends with the framework criteria. Make sure you know how you respond to those criteria in the framework. We're not looking for fluff. We're not looking for filler. We're looking for quality evidence. Have your written submission with us when we do the professional discussion. We will ask you about it. There are no set questions for this. It's important to understand there are no set questions for this. The assessors will talk to you about your individual submission. So have your submission with you, because we're going to talk to you about it. We're going to dig into that. We're going to say, I noticed you said this. Tell me about that. How did that work out? What was the outcome of that? What was really challenging in that? Those kinds of things will be very individual to you. Make sure you plan. Have a bit of a practice. Don't over practice it because you'll kill the dynamics of it. But be prepared. Be very prepared and think about how am I? Can I do this? Is this the right time for me to do this? Do I need to wait 6 months? Whatever it might be. am I in the right space to be doing this? Just because colleagues and peers around me are all doing this, is this the best time for me? And the most important thing I would say is treat us as a real pitch. You are the engagement. We want to engage with you. We want you to demonstrate how you meet the criteria. We want you to succeed. Give yourself the best opportunity possible. Remember, this is hands-on, practical, real world. This is not academic. Wish you all the best with your application, and we hope to receive a submission from you soon. At that point, I'm going to go back to the studio, and we've got a guest with us today who we're going to have a chat with. Well, Simon, thank you for us today. Really welcome you and really value your time with us this morning. And for everybody listening, Simon is an assessor with us. Simon is one of our team of assessors. And Simon, as I said, has been through the process. Simon is a very experienced management consultant. I'm really glad to have him on board. So welcome, Simon.
Thank you.
So one of the things I thought would be useful really for us to discuss for people online and joining us this morning is when you do an assessment, what are the key things that you're looking for when you first pick up that assessment?
Well, for me, clearly, you've structured the submission is in a structured format, so it goes through all of the competencies right from the ethics at the beginning through to your professional development at the end. What I'm looking for is evidence in each of those areas that you are operating at chartered level. And I think the other thing that maybe hasn't come out so far is there's chartered, applied, and foundation for all of the competencies. And when I read through them, some of the evidence for me looks as if it's foundation or it might be applied. And therefore, what I'm looking for then following on from that is how do you bolster that up so you can prove actually you're operating at a chartered level? How are you influencing a client strategy? How are you improving their business? How do you create value for your clients? And that's you rather than a team. And I think David touched on that. I see a lot of submissions where it's very team still, and it really should be I. And that for me is key. It's showing what you have done, where you have done it, how. So if I look through the scoring, the question that always is in my head is, so how did you do that? You know, I lead teams and I'm inclusive. And so how are you inclusive? What does that mean in terms of your team member? How do you demonstrate that? Now it's tough, and I know it's really tough because there's 54 competencies and there's 2,500 words. So if you divide one by the other, you'll see that's quite a challenge. So we're not expecting everything, but you know, in each section, we're looking for enough to get you through to the next stage. And then in the next stage, what happens is I will dig down into some of the gappy areas that I think need to be demonstrated at chartered level. And we'll have a discussion. We'll say, well, you know, you talked about this, but where have you actually sort of challenged this? Where have you developed this? Where have you introduced this? And those are the kind of things that I'm going to be discussing. And those are the things that start me off when I look at the submission.
I think that's really important to bring up the issue of the different levels, and thank you for that. You know, you mentioned the foundation, applied, and chartered, and I think that's really important to focus on that a little bit, because where people are applying, not everybody is going to have chartered for everything, are they? Not everybody's going to be at that status, and some areas will be less strong, shall we say, than others. And I think even if somebody gets through and is awarded the status, I think knowing that, and I know we do that in the feedback when we give feedback to people after this process, having that information gives you an idea where to think about your CPD, doesn't it? You know, these are the areas I need to focus on. There's no point in focusing more energy on the things that I'm already strong at. So when we think about that feedback, focusing on areas that are a little weaker enables them to grow and develop and become the stronger areas as well as people go on. And picking that up in CPD, I think, is really important as well, and a good tip for everybody. So when you pick up an assessment, what does a good assessment look like?
So I think it's several. Well, let's start with the very beginning. One, it's got to be in the word count. So I start by having to check the word count, because you'll be amazed at the amount of people that try and use a very small font and try and convince you it's in the word count. So forget about that. Make sure it's in the word count. Make sure it's clear. You know, for me, if I have to go digging around and it's not clear what competency you're trying to illustrate, with that particular sentence, then for me it takes more time, it's more complicated. So make it clear what you're saying in terms of competency. You've got the column, show what competency you're trying to show with that statement you're putting in. And one statement can actually cover quite a few competencies in the same word, in the same sentence. So think about that, not just a single competency. If you can bring in, how I inspire people, how I lead people, how I make them comfortable, all of that into a single sentence, then do, because you'll be ticking several in the same sentence. So I think that's important. Ensure it's current. David touched on that. The amount of times that people put in things that happened 10 years ago. Are you really still doing that? Probably not. And I think it's got to be recent, past 3, 4, whatever years. And I think that's clear. And it's all about, again, you and what you've achieved. The amount of times I have to put, is this you, in my sort of comments for me, and how did you get there was another classic. And the other thing, don't forget about a management consultant, your value, your worth is what you've done, what you know, and all that of experience to a client. So keeping current, keeping up to date, keeping your value in terms of what your clients see you for is really important. If that comes out in the submission as well, I think that's very useful in terms of, yes, you're definitely operating at chartered level. You're not at foundation, you're not at applied, you are definitely at chartered. And I think those are the key things. And not all of them have to be there. There can be a few tiny gaps, but the majority in each section have to be covered. And I think that's really important. If you do that, then you'll get through to the next level, provided they're demonstrating you're at that you're at chartered level. If you don't, then you might get referred, but that's an opportunity, if you, as David said, rethink. In the referral, it shows the gappy areas, let's call it that. Go back to those, have a look at those versus the competencies. Have I really been clear about how I'm operating at chartered level for those competencies? And this is my evidence. If you can put that back into referral, you'll go through. And I think that's really key for you. It's not a massive issue. It's just there's a few gaps and you need to fill them in. And it's just a guidance for you to say, you're weak in these areas in your submission, please bolster them up.
I think that's really brilliant advice. And I think something you said in there about value and how do you bring value kind of made me think about something brutalistic I used to say when we started this process, really, and think about why should I pay you your day rate? Whatever that may be, that's the value that you bring, isn't it? And as a client, if I'm a client, why should I pay you what you charge? And if you say that to people, it changes the thinking, doesn't it? It's well, of course I'm worth that because I do this, 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 and this. And sometimes when you approach these things, and we've had people in the past who've approached this and missed that and sort of got trapped in that academic flow of things. Well, here's the question, here's the answer, and taken away that in real world terms, why do I get what I get, and am I worth it? And if you can say yes to those things, you're onto a winner, aren't you?
So I think the final bit, sorry, David, on that, some of the ones I see coming in, that you've got a very, very competent, capable technical consultant who isn't necessarily a management consultant. They may do wonderful technical designs, but they're not leading the client in terms of where they're going, what their future looks like, how to improve their business, how to really restructure their business around it. They may be doing both, in which case that's fine. But make sure that you really are a management consultant and you know what that means before you start to apply this. Otherwise, you end up wasting everybody's time potentially. Absolutely. I mean, picking up on that as well, is there anything you would say about what does in your mind, I guess, what does a poor submission look like when you pick one up? A poor submission to me it's wordy for a start, i.e. it's not precise. It's get to your point, it's fluffy. It doesn't really get to the nitty-gritty of the competencies in every sentence. If there's a sentence there that doesn't add value to a competency, you've got to ask, why is it there? And then, for me, if you haven't structured it in a way that flows with the competencies properly, I end up having to go backwards and forwards and I'll go right back to the beginning again because that was covered. It just isn't obvious. And I think the thing is to make it obvious as you go through. The fluffy, wordy things just are they generally haven't got enough data. You can't fit it in. I mean, to be totally honest, if you're being very wordy about it, you won't cover the competencies. And I think for me, that's the biggie, is that focus in on those, get them covered off with evidence and why you, and then for me, it's really easy to pick it up. And I can see them, you proved them, I can tick all the boxes, you can go straight through to professional discussion. And in the PD, we'll get into deeper areas about maybe some of the things that I didn't think were covered at chartered level, may have been at applied level, but it's a much more easy path to go down if you just put all the effort in your submission.
I think that's key, isn't it? Not wanting to put too fine a point on it, but make it easy for you guys to say yes. We want to say yes. We're not, as I said, we're not looking to catch anybody out, are we? We want to say, yeah, this tells me everything I need to know. Let's crack on. And if people do that or attempt to do that, I think that gives us the best possible opportunity.
Yeah, and it is mechanical. We do score these as they go through. So it's not as if, we're looking for your evidence at chartered level. We can see some at applied level, maybe some at foundation. But at the end of the day, if the total sum is good enough, you will get through. And that's the thing. It is a structured, scored based process.
Absolutely. One just before we go to take any questions from the audience, if we have any questions from the audience, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to people when they're approaching this process?
Take your time. I think read the competency framework inside out first. And I think, if you've read that first, you'll understand what we're looking for. Then just take your time to structure it and challenge yourself as you go through your submission. You're going to get challenged with word count, and you're going to find that very tough. Everybody I speak to finds it tough because you've got to put all that evidence in a very tight word count. So you've got to put the work in. If you put the work in and you're really precise about what you're saying, and you refer it to the competencies, and you take your time, then I think it's straightforward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Thank you as always. Natasha, do we have any questions from our audience?
Hi, David. We do have one question, but it's very specific to this person and their qualifications. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect you both offline, just to make it a bit easier. So otherwise, we don't have any questions from the audience. So unless you have some final top tips to give, we shall end the session.
I think one final top tip for me is, I've said this quite a bit this morning, but treat us as the pitch. Treat this as a real engagement. This isn't academic. We want to know what you do that makes you so good and how you're going to stay as good as you already are.
That's great, thank you. So that is it for today's session. Thank you everyone who joined us, and thank you David and Simon for your insights and expertise. For any additional information and guidance, please contact your firm's ChMC Programme Manager or a member of the ChMC team at chmc@managers.org.uk. A recording of the webinar will be made available to all those who registered for the event. Please do take a few moments to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing our evaluation form. The link is in the chat. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.